Okay, so we currently have our scene set up. We have some textures on some of our models. We have lighting set up, but what we need to put in place now is a camera. And that can be done up here in the rendering menu. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my cursor highlight bit here. Um, yeah, we can do it from up here, and there is a button called camera. Of course, you can go up to create and cameras, and there's a group of camera options up here that we'll talk about later. We're going to go with the standard option first and then talk about a little bit about the rest of them later. Um, when you click on create camera, it jumps right to the middle here. You can kind of see it, and that icon represents it. It's a little hard to see. Sometimes you might want to turn off shaded or wireframe um, or textured, and so you can see through things. Sometimes I would just like to turn on wireframe to kind of see what's going on in the scene. But there the camera sits. We're not looking through the camera. It's called camera one. And just like everything else we've looked at, there are attributes associated with this object. This object is a camera, and its controls are set to camera. Its angle of view, focal length, and whatnot are all there. The focal length default is 35 millimeter. Camera scale is set to 1. Angle of view adjusts if you adjust the focal length, for example. Not something we're going to do right now. We're going to kind of leave that alone. We're going to go with a very standard setup here. Um, but let's go ahead and look through the camera. Now look through the camera and look through another viewport. I'm actually going to click on this icon over here, which is two viewports. One of them is perspective, and the other one I'm going to change up here. Under panels, perspective, you'll notice that there is now camera one. That did not used to be there, but now that we've created it, and this is what camera one is looking at. If I change where camera one is, I'm going to tap the W key and move it back along the Z axis. You can see it's changing the view there. So um, yeah, I'm going to back this up a little bit. I can move it up and down. You can see that that sort of changes where the camera is pointing and whatnot. And if I have the camera selected, I can tap the T key just like I did with the spotlight, and that gives me the ability to target something, right? So if I want to target things. Right now, though, I'm actually going to undo that. I don't want to target anything with the camera right now, so I'm just going to hit that move key again without tapping T. T brings up that aim. If I switch my transform tool back and forth, it goes away. We're not going to aim at any particular object. We're just going to do a very basic animated fly through of our scene. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn the textures back on in this viewport, and that will require me to move some things around there. So I'm going to come over here again, move my camera to where I think it belongs. You may want to use the default view set up here, which is that, but then change this panel to camera. This is something we set up in a previous exercise. Panel layout can be adjusted over here. You could do all kinds of different things with a panel layout, but right now I'm going to make this the camera, and then I'm going to come over here and actually make this one the top view, and then this one the side view. And I'm going to turn off by hitting 5 or 4 rather. I'm going to turn off shading so I can actually see what's going on. So now I can see that my camera's here. I can move it around kind of this way from the top view. I can move it this way from the side view, and it gives me a level of control over what's going on here. As an object, right, I want to be able to see what I'm actually seeing with the camera first before I go animating it around, but as an object I'm just going to animate it flying through the scene like that. But before I do, I need to see what the camera is actually going to give me in terms of output. And up here you have a button called Film Gate, and that Film Gate button right up here will show me, based on these settings over here, what I'm actually going to see. Now, the hard part about this is, given the way that I set up the viewport, it's not actually super easy, so you got to scoot some things around here. I'm going to go ahead and scoot my outliner over. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and close it just for a second. I'll bring it up later. Scoot this over a bit. I want to be able to see the entirety of the film gate. If I'm in here, I'm not actually seeing what it's trying to show me, which is, again, the span of what the camera is going to see. Where is this set? Well, it's set obviously based on the camera settings, but also in the render settings up here. So I mentioned we would come back to this. We're currently set up with Maya software, and in the common space for rendering, we currently have an HD 540 output. If I change that to like 1K square and close it, that's going to change what, the resolution that this would uh, have in terms of output. If I change it to something else like 640 by 480, it would change it to something else. But we're going to go ahead and leave it at that sort of default, right? So, and again, that was HD 540 is what we have. But if we really want to see after we change our render settings what we have, we can click on IPR. My IPR is set to Maya software. You can see it's very bright. That's because I have view transform turned on. I don't want that turned on. This gives me a more accurate idea over here. And then of course, if I turn my lighting back on in here and turn my textures back on in here and then turn this view transform off, I'm going to get a better idea of what my lighting is going to look like. So yeah, so that's what we have going on here. But if I'm going to animate a basic fly through, I need to see what my camera is going to see. Again, I'm going to turn on my gate mask to see what I got going on, and then my film gate being kind of the most important there to give me an idea of what I'm actually going to see. Now that I know what I'm going to see, let's talk about a couple of things over here in the camera control area. I have a control with control and aim. Aim means I would be able to control the aim point and animate it so that I could move that along with the camera. Because we're just going to do a basic fly through, we're not going to do that. And that's different than hitting the T key. Camera aim and up is even more advanced, not anything we're going to cover right now. We're just going to go ahead and do a basic fly through like I said. So you've got the camera attributes set to standard camera. You've got frustum display controls. We're not going to control that. We'll talk about viewing frustum later. But under film back, you actually have some different options here that you can change to default settings. For example, a 35mm Academy setting will give you that sort of view. And in fact, this is a fine setting, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. It changes pretty much everything that's listed here. And then you also have depth of field. Now, depth of field is more advanced in terms of what you get out of it. But if I turn on depth of field, everything gets very blurry unless I were to change the focal distance to like 50 or something like that. Some things would be blurry and some things wouldn't. You might notice that I have additional information up here. If I go display and heads up display, I've turned on object details, and that actually gives me the details of the object that I have selected. In this case, distance from camera is 24. So that's kind of interesting, right? Let's see what we can do with that. So I'm going to go back and select my camera from the outliner real quick. And then I'm going to look at the focal distance, right? And if I adjust that based on the focal distance to 24, it's currently set, focal distance is set to 50, but if I change it to 24, you'll notice that that came into view. So we're now focusing on that. But if I move the camera, then that focus, right, starts to come in and out. So using depth of field is an artistic choice. It's definitely a little bit more in the advanced category of photography or camera use. So we're actually not going to use that. We're just, again, going to do a basic fly through. So in your animation, the expectation is that the doors open and then the camera flies through. So let's talk about what that looks like. When you start this view, you want to make sure that your lights are set up effectively. A couple things to check on lights before you do anything is whether or not you're using depth map shadows or ray trace shadows. If you don't have any shadows turned on, it will in fact not have any shadows, and you need to make a choice about that. But the preference here would be that you are trying to create a realistic lighting environment. You'll notice that ray trace shadows is turned on for the spotlight. What's the difference? Well, if I go into my render settings and I look at my software, ray tracing being on or off will control whether or not those ray trace shadows actually work. So you have to be mindful of that. And ray tracing is listed right here, as you can see, and whether or not we turn on ray tracing is up here in terms of ray tracing quality, right? So I would go ahead and make your choice based on personal preference. I'm going to go ahead and use depth map shadows for everything and make sure that I get shadows when I do an IPR test. So I'm going to go ahead and say test the IPR right here and see if I have shadows, which I do. Okay, so all my shadows are working there. In terms of animating the doors, in a previous tutorial we talked about using the channel box layer editor to make sure that we have what we need. Over here we've got a little bit of history that's going to need to be deleted. Be careful about don't freeze things once you've got them frozen lined up on the doorway. You can see this one is actually turned to 83.6. We're going to go 90, right? If you make it 0, it's going to close the door there. We're going to close the door here, and now we need to animate. So we need to set a keyframe by hitting the S key, and I've selected 240 frames or a 10-second fly through. So I'm going to set a key over here as well by hitting the S key, and then I'm going to go ahead and decide when I am going to open the doors, or how long it's going to take to open the doors, and about 1 second might be right, 1/1000. So I'm going to set another keyframe here, and then I'm going to rotate 90 degrees here and negative 90 degrees here. Okay, and you'll notice that the channel box layer editor here turned pink. That means that auto key is on. It's listening to see if any changes have been made. But right now the doors will now open and close based on, you know, that numerical difference. But now that we know what's happening, I'm going to go out here into this view and notice that my camera is there, right, in the side view, and it should be more or less aligned on the top view. And then I'm going to say, okay, so I need to set a keyframe at 24 frames with it in that position, and then over the course of this many frames up to 240, I want it to fly through. So if I have auto key turned on down here, this little red arrow, circular arrow, so almost looks like a recycling symbol, then that means that when I move the object, when I have it selected, if I move down the timeline, it's going to automatically key the changes that I make. So what you just saw there is what's going to happen over the course of 240 frames, and you'll see a keyframe actually popped up there. Now if you want to manipulate this through your graph editor, that happens up here. I've actually docked my graph editor at the bottom because I prefer that above the timeline, and you can see that the camera is translating along the z-axis kind of neatly there. If you want to get creative with it to some extent, but what we're looking for is just a nice clean camera fly through over the course of 10 seconds, right, which is 24 frames. I'll go ahead and hit play, but before I do, I'm going to right click here and I'm going to make sure that my playback speed is set to play every frame max real time. And then I'm just going to go ahead and hit play and see what this looks like. Okay, so now I get a nice, slow, deliberate playthrough of my corridor. And at any point in the timeline, what's nice is I can kind of take a pause here right in the middle of the timeline as I'm scrubbing through my timeline here and just do a quick IPR rendering of my current edit. I'm going to turn off again the view transform and see kind of what my lighting looks like, and then of course I can make adjustments from there. But that is essentially what we're looking for in terms of how we would run our camera through the scene. Again, settings on the camera are also listed over here, but we're going to go with a fairly vanilla setup for our camera. I wouldn't change a lot of this stuff until we have time to cover it in class further, but we're just going for a basic fly through of your scene as such.